Hey, everybody, I'm Yasmin Vasugian in for Katie Tur. Donald Trump just fielded around an hour's worth of questions on stage at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention in Chicago. Here is just some of what he had to say.
I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always identified as a black woman. She went to a historically black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear.
Coming from the border are millions and millions of people that happen to be taking black jobs. You had the best.
What exactly is a black job, sir?
A black job is anybody that has a job. That's what it is. Anybody that has a job.
All right.
And
Mr. President,
they're taking the employment away from black people.
By the way, that was just the first 5 minutes or so of the Q&A at NABJ today. His competition, Vice President Kamala Harris, just called the appearance a, quote, total disaster for the former president. We have got a whole lot to get to, and that's just putting it lightly. So let's get started. Joining us now, NBC senior national politics correspondent John Allen, Mark Leibovich, staff writer for The Atlantic and NBC analyst, and MSNBC contributor and editor-at-large at the 19th, Aaron Haynes. Aaron, start us off. I know that you're headed to NABJ. You're watching this online. You weren't there live, though. We just played some of that sound. And by the way, that was the first 5 to 7 minutes of that Q&A. There was a lot more after that as well. Give me kind of your first gut reaction to what you heard from the former president.
Yeah, I mean, look, Yasmin, basically every question was the answer to every question was a new headline. It was 34 minutes. He was supposed to actually go for an hour, so we could have gotten even more from this interview. Look, journalists at the end of the day interview newsmakers, and the former president definitely made news in this conversation. He was combative, he was evasive, he was defensive, he was attacking Vice President Kamala Harris. At times, he was attacking some of the black women journalists that were on the stage. But look, he was answering questions that he on topics and in a way that he normally is not asked on the outlets that he prefers to go to, right? On topics like immigration, on topics like police reform, on January 6th, on, his running mate, J.D. Vance. He's asked about, what a black job is, I think maybe for the first time since he uttered that statement. So, really so much to dig into and unpack here. And the Harris campaign already reacting to this interview that just ended.
Yeah, and we're going to read that in just a little bit. I want to go around the horn here, get everybody's reaction, and then we'll kind of dig into more as to why he was there and sort of what came out of the last 34 minutes or so of hearing from the former president on that stage. Mark, to you next in your reaction to what you just heard.
Yeah, I mean, I need to watch the tape of the whole thing. I just saw the snippets that everyone else did. Certainly a barn burner makes a lot of news really quickly. I do wonder, the initial reaction to people is, wow, what a disaster. It's combative. He lost the crowd. But what is Donald Trump looking to do here? And more importantly, how do his people, or how do the people he thinks he needs to reach, respond to this? Is this just him getting just kind of exhilarated because he is getting everyone excited and he's the center of attention, right, and he's making controversy, all of which he likes a lot? But I don't know. This is the kind of thing where it looks like there's a lot of material there that the Harris campaign, I assume, is going to make a lot of hay with over the next several days.
When you're looking at this, Jonathan Allen, from an analysis perspective, or an analyst, I should say, perspective, and you're wondering why it is the former president decided to go to NABJ in the first place. Much of what we read in the lead up to his appearance there was trying to kind of court the black vote, which we, by the way, know is not a monolith, not all voting down the same line, nonetheless still wanting to go to NABJ to field some of these questions, not necessarily doing it successfully, though. Is that why you believe the former president and his team decided to have him go to NABJ today?
Well, I wouldn't presume to know how every person reacts to his interview today. But what I would say is that sometimes things are billed as one thing and they're intended as another. He walked into that audience, he walked into that room intending to be combative. He started talking to the first questioner, calling her rude. His entire demeanor was combative throughout. He wanted the headlines out of this to be about the combative nature of the interview. I think he believes that helps him with his MAGA base to have a combative interview with the National Association of Black Journalists. You saw some of the things that he said, which are certainly headline grabbing and will get him back in the news where he has not been for some amount of time, dating back to the switch of Democratic presidential candidates. Even before that, at the Republican convention, there was a J.D. Vance sort of bump of news. And so, I think that he may have had many goals here, and I don't think we should assume that what he said was accidental.
I want to play some more sound, Aaron, that I'd like your reaction to. It's talking about Kamala Harris and taking the bar examination and also a cognitive test. Let's listen to that, and then I'll have you react on the other side.
Would you consider taking the cognitive test?
Mr. President,
I would love to
and
do
make it public?
Well, I've already taken 2 of them, but I'll do it again.
Mr. President, how do you intend to...
I suggested, Harris, that let's take one. I said, Joe and I will go and take a cognitive test. Now, I'd do it with her, too. I would do it with her also. You know what? She failed her law exam. She didn't pass her law exam, so maybe she wouldn't pass the cognitive test.
Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is part of the familiar Trump playbook, particularly when he attacks women, trying to disqualify them, attacking their intelligence, right? I mean, he's already referred to the sitting vice president as dumb, as unqualified, as somebody who's not very accomplished. And now today on stage at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention, he is referring to, is implying that she maybe couldn't pass a cognitive test and bringing up her bar exam. This is somebody who obviously passed the bar because she went on to be, attorney general, a district attorney. This is somebody who has practiced law, who is a prosecutor, and who is running a campaign against him currently, touting her prosecutorial credentials against his criminal legal challenges. So, I don't know how well this is going to play, but again, this is a playbook that he is familiar with, that he is used to, that he has used against other Black women in politics for sure, and other women that he has faced in running for the presidency. So I think it's kind of par for the course, and we're just seeing the latest example here today on that stage in Chicago.
John, I thought it was interesting what you said earlier, which is to not discount that Donald Trump means what he says and says what he means, essentially, and that he didn't say all of these things purposefully on that stage. Because as I was taking a listen to the last 40 minutes or so of that Q&A, I thought to myself, I felt as if he was speaking to a MAGA crowd versus speaking to the National Association of Black Journalists and potentially Black voters as well.
Yeah, the audience is not necessarily, particularly when you have a televised event, not necessarily the one in front of you. Clearly, he didn't come up with this concept, false concept of Kamala Harris identifying as Indian at one point in her life and as Black now. Obviously, she's identified as both for her entire life. It should not be hard for him to understand this concept. One set of his grandparents is of German ancestry, the other set is of Scottish ancestry, but he clearly believes that there is a group of voters that want to hear that she's been somehow deceptive about her background. It's, I don't know exactly what value that has for him, but I have a good feeling he does.
Mark, I think what is most interesting, or one of the more interesting things that came out of this is, and it's so much of the reporting backs this up, which is the Trump J.D. Vance ticket does not necessarily know how to attack Kamala Harris as of yet, right? They had built a playbook for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as his running mate, but they did not build a playbook for Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. And it seemed as if he was kind of lobbying these attacks over the last 40 minutes or so against Kamala Harris and answering some of these questions and not landing them because it doesn't seem like they really have a plan as of yet.
Yeah, they seem strangely ill-prepared by this. I mean, especially given that it wasn't a surprise. I mean, a lot of people saw this coming for a long time. He seemed to be mentioning Biden as much as he was mentioning Kamala Harris in the appearance. So that was kind of strange. I do think, I mean, to Jonathan's point, he was clearly looking for fireworks. I think he expected and was sort of welcoming this to be a raucous environment. But I don't know if he had really planned out what his intent was here. I think he just again, just sort of gravitates to anything that will cause controversy, make him the center of attention, and let the chips fall where they may. But no, I think this does speak to how they're ill prepared to talk about the running mate question, and how also Vance does not seem to be getting much traction early on.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear here as well. Not everybody in the audience, by the way, was in fact journalists. Many of the folks that attend this are also not journalists as well. And there were folks in the crowd that oftentimes cheered some of what the former president was saying amidst all that was said over the last 40 minutes or so. John Allen, Aaron Haynes, Mark Leibovich, thank you guys all for jumping on. We appreciate it. Want to bring in Basil Smykel, MSNBC political analyst and professor at Columbia University. He's the former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party. Also with us, former Republican Pennsylvania Congressman Charlie Dent. He's a senior advisor of, quote, our Republican legacy. Basil, I want to read for you some of what we're getting in from the Harris camp, reacting to what we just heard in that room at NABJ. One source familiar with the campaign thinking saying he is completely unhinged. This is also Trump. He cannot help himself. Also reacting to the claims that only up until recently, Kamala Harris proclaimed herself as being black. They said it is completely insulting and repulsive. Exactly what KJP, Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary for President Biden, said from the podium. Another source close to Kamala Harris saying, and I quote, it is simply a lie and easily disproved. She went to Howard, for Christ's sake. She is an AKA, which is a legacy sorority at Howard University, by the way. This is just painful, they added. Basil, give me your reaction as you were watching that.
I had quite a few on Kamala Harris. You're absolutely right. She went to Howard University. She's an AKA. I'm an alpha. It's our sister sorority, if you will. So I understand what she's gone through. I understand her rooting herself in the black community, both through the fraternity, through the school itself, but also through her life and the things that she's done in her life. So her blackness, if you will, does not need to be questioned here. What I found in the speech or in the remarks is probably some of the most disgusting rhetoric I've heard at the presidential level. That Donald Trump believes that he is the arbiter of what it means to be black in the United States. We have seen this coming from him before. He talked a lot about Tish James. He talked a lot about Alvin Bragg and sort of would constantly sort of dismiss their credentials and also talk about them in other ways that were very demeaning. We saw this with Barack Obama. He's not from here. The sort of othering of black people, particularly folks in high political positions in this country, is his go-to play, because he believes that in doing so, he somehow gains points from his supporters. And to some of the points that were made earlier, I don't think he was necessarily speaking to anybody in that crowd. His audience is external to that crowd. It's his supporters, to be able to go to them and say, look at the fact that I went into that building and I was there for you, telling them everything that's on your mind.
I think that's fascinating, because everything that I have read up until this point was about this is a grab for black voters that he feels as if he might have an inroads with, especially black men right now that seemed more open to Donald Trump this time around. However, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is you think he was speaking to his base.
Absolutely.
Saying, I'm standing up for you.
Absolutely. There has been no real credible polling that has said that there is a significant movement of black voters to him, particularly black men to him. Yeah. So all of this is just trying to create this sort of platform based on a lie and then build from that. Anything that he did in that room, and I'm not going to get into a question of whether or not he should have been invited, but what I would say is that he did everything that we should have expected him to do. Tell lies, not really answer questions fully, or not in the ways that you would expect a presidential candidate to answer questions, and be able to then take everything that he's saying, put himself back in the news, and be able to go to his supporters and say, hey, look, I went into the room, I took their questions, I stood up. So, I'm the guy that's really tough here. Because I bet you some of that same language, if he ever does debate Kamala Harris, a lot of that same language and demeanor is going to come out on that debate stage.
Charlie, react for me, if you will, to what Basil is saying. Also, kind of jumping off the point that this is not Donald Trump's kind of usual MO, right? Not taking live questions from journalists on a stage in which he knows he's going to be fact-checked, in which he knows he's going to be kind of in this tete-a-tete confrontation in which he was.
Well, catastrophe is too kind a word to describe that interview for Donald Trump. I think he actually went in there with the intention of talking to black voters and saying, hey, give me a look. I have an agenda here that I think you might like.
Okay. Instead,
he spoke, he has no sense of propriety. He offended them. He insulted them. He said Kamala Harris just turned black. I mean, how does that happen? I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, I can't imagine something that backfired so badly. If he wanted to pander to his MAGA base, there were better ways to do it than this, because he offended a lot of people. I just don't see why would they even send him in there if they thought that something like this could possibly happen. I mean, this is there's going to be a lot of damage from this. Whatever support Donald Trump had from the African-American community, I suspect it's going to be a little bit less now. He didn't have a lot to begin with, but it's going to be less. So I just see this as a disaster on all fronts. I don't think this was in any way his intent to go in there and pander to the MAGA base. I think he was supposed to go in there to appeal to African-Americans, and in that effort, he failed miserably.
Do you agree, Basil, with what Charlie said, that any kind of support that he had, any inkling of support that he had, the possibility of black men, for instance, being more open to a Trump 2.0 presidency may very well have dissipated with this appearance? Or do you think it may not land as big of a punch as we're expecting?
What I believe, I agree with him in the sense that what little black support he probably had, I don't think he's going to lose that, because I think he's
that's the Trump base.
That's the Trump base, and I think in some ways whatever language he used in the responses to the questions probably came from the 2 or 3 supporters that he has in that community, from whoever was on the stage at the RNC in his ear, telling them to say those kinds of things. But the one thing that I will disagree with is I don't think, it may not have been rehearsed, but it's not unlike him to have said the things that he said. And I go back to the fact that he started birtherism. He othered Barack Obama. You're not from here. You're not part of us. That is his MO. So I can't sort of extricate this instance from this larger trend of finding ways to sort of other black people in this country.
So Charlie, how does the Harris campaign, how do they capitalize on this moment, right? We heard the statement, I just read it for folks, kind of the reaction that we're getting from inside the Harris campaign, an absolute disaster for the former president. This is, as they put it, who he is. This is crazy, they said at one point as well. How do they capitalize on this moment and ride it?
They simply have to roll the tape. They just have to use his own words against him. Show the worst moments of the worst moments for Trump. Show those segments over and over again. The most damaging thing a campaign can do is use the words of that candidate against himself. And Donald Trump just gave them plenty of fodder. I mean, I don't know that the Harris campaign has to say too much other than just roll the tape, put the ads up in Trump's own words. And as Basil said, this is kind of who Donald Trump is. And, it really speaks to the fitness question. And, weird seems to be the word of the week, right? Everybody's saying this was weird. It was absurd. And I think in this case, Trump really did significant damage to himself. I mean, he's trying to persuade swing voters. Who was that appealing to? He's done just like with the J.D. Vance selection. He basically brought somebody in who already, Vance didn't bring anything to Trump that he didn't already have. So who's he appealing to here? He is not broadening his base. And so the Harris people, all they got to do is roll the tape, keep showing Trump in his own words, and it's the best thing they can do.
I'm just gonna speak to the control room for a second. Guys, do we have Aaron Gilchrist on the phone? Okay. So we're waiting for one of our journalists, NBC News correspondent Aaron Gilchrist, who is actually in the room, who's hoping to dial into us to give us a reaction from inside that room. But Basil, as we're talking about this, I spent some time down in Philly with black voters recently and asking them, this was before, of course, Kamala Harris was kind of the potential top of the ticket. And I asked them if they were excited about this race, and many of them were going to sit it out, honestly. And as I reached back out to them after the decision was made by the president to step aside, they still were reticent about telling me which way they were committing. So you think moments like this for the former president, as we said, right, maybe the support would dissipate amongst any black voters that actually supported him, would make someone turn out, right? Because that's really what it's going to come down to for Democrats.
Sure, and here's in part why. When Joe Biden was at the top of the ticket, in many ways, folks were supportive of Joe, but in other ways, it was anti-Trump. Right now, we are in a pro-Kamala Harris environment. And what I think voters are looking at are ways to move from undecided to be able to vote for Kamala Harris. Because when we were spending that 25 days, Democrats were saying that Joe Biden shouldn't run for re-election, we started to see some slippage in the polls. I don't think those voters went to Donald Trump. They just went to a let me wait and see column. And I think the momentum, the money, the speeches, the rallies, I think are Kamala Harris's way of saying, take another look at us, come over here. You know, what we have for you is both anti-Trump, but pro a future younger generation and a stronger agenda for the country. And to take Charlie's point about independent voters, it matters so much with them, right? Because for those voters who, again, might have been in that category as wait and see, that energy and not that sort of chaos, not that combative attitude, I think is what's going to win them over at the end of the day.
So as promised, want to bring in on the phone from NABJ in Chicago, NBC White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist, who was in the room as the former president was taking some of those questions. Aaron, if you will, give us the reaction from inside that room and what you saw and heard.
Well, so Yasmin, I should start by saying that I am a member of the National Association of Black Journalists, and most of the people in the room this afternoon are also members, working journalists from all levels, local, national. There are a lot of professors and a ton of students who were in the room as well, some independent journalists and some people who are not journalists but are peripherally connected to what we do professionally. And I think what you all have been talking about was very much what we saw in the room. There was an effort at the very beginning to get people to sort of remember that we are working journalists, most of us, and to be respectful in the moment. But there were reactions almost out of the gate of surprise, of I think disdain to some of the responses that people were hearing from the former president. You talked about the fact that this was contentious and the former president was combative. Almost immediately in his responses, we saw Rachel Scott from ABC News ask the first question there, where she laid out some of what she sort of described the impacts that the Trump presidency or things that former President Trump has said as it relates to the black community, and asked him why he thought the black community should support him. And he immediately described her line of questioning as nasty and went after her, went after ABC News. And that really set the tone, I think, for this shortened conversation. We heard people in the room gasp in surprise with the line of response that the former president gave. And that sort of continued as the questions continued. We did hear him talk, say a lot of the things that he typically says on the campaign trail. He talked about about the vice president, is now a competitor in this race for the White House, and her work. He used the term border czar to describe work that she's done as it relates to Central American countries. Obviously, she wasn't specifically a border czar in the sense that I think he was describing her. He tried to defend J.D. Vance, his running mate, the senator from Ohio, in some of his responses as well. There was a question about Vice President Harris's race, where he went on to describe her as a person who formerly identified as Indian and now identifies as black, and that drew surprise in the room as well. We didn't sort of hear booing, but there was certainly there were moments throughout the conversation where people in the room were upset by his responses and were not holding back in making him aware of that. I should note that this conversation, we understood it. Those of us who are attending this conference, we understood this to be an hour-long conversation that was supposed to happen. It did happen late. The former president said that there were audio issues that contributed to everything starting late. We know that he had trouble hearing one of the panelists who were asking questions, and that panelist had trouble hearing him as well. The Trump campaign sent out a statement that said NABJ couldn't solve the audio issues, and we have a rally in Harrisburg to go to. We waited over 40 minutes backstage. That's from the Trump campaign communications director. This was supposed to be an hour. I think it was about 30 minutes, and then was abruptly stopped. One of the panel moderators said that the Trump campaign was ending the conversation at that point.
Got it. So they're saying they're ending the conversation because of audio issues, but we do know that the conversation was supposed to go on for an hour. Is that correct, Aaron? Just so I hear you right?
Right, that's what we understood it to be. Those of us who were attending understood it to go for an hour. But I will say it was supposed to start at noon. At least that's what we had all been told going in. And it started, I think, closer to 1 o'clock, if not after.
Aaron, I'm super appreciative that you would jump on the phone and talk to us and kind of give us an inside look of what was happening in that room. So thank you. I'll let you get back to it there. Aaron Gilchrist for us. Thank you. Basil, if you would just react to what we just heard from Aaron inside that room. What stood out to you?
No, what stands out to me is that these are professionals that have a job to do, and they did it to the best of their ability. I will just add a comment in response to the question about black male voters. One of the most powerful things that I heard in the last few days was a pastor, and I'm sorry, I forget his name and where he's from, but he said that he as a black man could not stand idly by and let another black woman, meaning Kamala Harris, be disrespected in the ways that she is, particularly from a Donald Trump. And if there was any question about the response of black male voters to this candidacy, it is through that. It is about this sort of shared fate that we have in the community, something that Donald Trump does not know, will never understand, and will clearly sort of mock. But you may get to understand it on Election Day.
Yeah, and just want to be clear here, by the way, that the conversation was in fact ended by the Trump campaign.